Black undercover chef discovers waiter's deceptive practices at popular restaurant. Plates crashed to the floor as Marcus stood frozen in the middle of Bellamy's elegant dining room, his chef's whites now splattered with red wine and seafood bisque. The restaurant fell silent as every diner turned to stare. "You're nothing but a fraud," shouted Vincent, the senior waiter, his face contorted with rage. "You had no right to be in my section, no right to go through my receipts." Marcus's heart pounded as he glanced toward the manager's office where Diane Bellamy, the restaurant owner, was reviewing the evidence he had gathered over the past 2 weeks. Evidence that would expose what Vincent had been doing to elderly patrons for months. "I had every right," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "Those people trusted you. Mrs. Coleman is 82 years old, for God's sake. She reminded you of your grandmother, remember? That's what you told her right before you overcharged her by $60. Vincent lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by his lapels. "You don't understand what you're talking about. You have no idea what—" The kitchen doors swung open as Diane emerged, her face ashen, holding a folder of receipts and credit card statements. Behind her stood Mrs. Coleman herself, supported by her daughter, both women's expressions a mixture of hurt and indignation. "Vincent," Diane said, her voice cutting through the silence. "It's all here, every transaction, every fake charge, every elderly customer you've been stealing from. How could you?" Vincent's grip on Marcus loosened as the color drained from his face. He looked from Diane to Mrs. Coleman, then back to Marcus, his expression shifting from rage to something else, something desperate and haunted. "You don't understand," Vincent whispered, his voice breaking. "None of you understand why But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 weeks earlier when Marcus Johnson first walked through the doors of Bellamy's, one of Philadelphia's most acclaimed restaurants. Marcus adjusted his tie nervously as he approached Bellamy's restaurant on that crisp October morning. At 58, he had never expected to be starting over again, much less working undercover. The elegant stone facade of the restaurant stood in stark contrast to the humble diners and soul food establishments where he had built his reputation over 30 years of cooking. "Just remember why you're doing this," he muttered to himself as he grasped the polished brass door handle. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, responsibility to his community, to his mother's generation who had worked so hard for everything they had. The interior of Bellamy's was all dark wood and muted lighting, white tablecloths pristine even in the morning sun that filtered through tall windows. Marcus took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fresh bread and polished silver. "Mr. Johnson?" A woman in her early 60s approached, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I'm Diane Bellamy. Welcome to my restaurant." Her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp as they assessed him. Marcus had researched her thoroughly. Widowed at 40, she had transformed her late husband's struggling bistro into one of the city's culinary landmarks. She had a reputation for fairness and excellence, which made the recent complaints all the more concerning. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mrs. Bellamy," Marcus replied with the practiced humility of someone applying for a position well below his qualifications. "I appreciate you taking a chance on me." "Your references are impeccable," she said, leading him through the dining room toward the kitchen. 30 years of experience doesn't walk through my door every day, even if most of it was at less formal establishments." Marcus caught the hesitation, the polite sidestep around acknowledging that his career had been spent primarily in black-owned restaurants rather than fine dining establishments like hers. He had anticipated this. It was, in fact, counting on it. "I'm looking forward to expanding my horizons," he said smoothly. "After my restaurant closed, I realized I needed to broaden my experience." What he didn't say was that his restaurant, Johnson's Family Kitchen, had been a beloved institution in West Philadelphia for 20 years before rising rents and gentrification had forced him to close 6 months ago. What he also didn't mention was that he was here because his mother's oldest friend, Alina Coleman, had called him in tears over her treatment at Bellamy's. "You were overcharged by how much?" he had asked her 3 weeks ago, sitting at her kitchen table as she showed him her credit card statement. $60 more than the menu prices," Alina had said, her hands trembling slightly as she pointed to the bill. "And Martha Gaines said the same thing happened to her last month. And to Robert and Louise Taylor, all of us, we're all older," Marcus had finished for her. "And black." Alina had nodded, eyes downcast. "The food was so wonderful, and the young man who served us, Vincent, he was so attentive, so charming, called me ma'am and said I reminded him of his grandmother. I gave him a 20% tip on top of what I now know was already an inflated bill." That conversation had led Marcus to reach out to his old friend Detective James Harris at the Philadelphia PD's Financial Crimes Unit. Harris had confirmed that several complaints had been filed, but they were difficult to prove as isolated incidents. "What we need," Harris had said, "is someone on the inside, someone who can document a pattern." And so here Marcus was, pretending to be a chef looking for work, when in reality he was here to catch a thief who seemed to be specifically targeting elderly black patrons who might not scrutinize their bills closely or might be too embarrassed to make a scene in such an upscale establishment. "Let me introduce you to the rest of the staff," Diane was saying as they pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The space was immaculate, all gleaming stainless steel and orderly workstations. A far cry from the controlled chaos of Marcus's own kitchen, where laughter and soul music had provided the soundtrack to his cooking for 2 decades. "This is Antonio, our head chef," Diane said, introducing a serious-looking man in his 40s who nodded curtly at Marcus. "And this is our front-of-house manager, Vincent Pearson." Marcus turned to find himself face-to-face with a handsome man in his 30s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. Vincent's smile was warm, his handshake firm as he met Marcus's gaze. "Welcome to Bellamy's," Vincent said, his voice smooth and confident. "We're delighted to have someone with your experience joining us." Marcus studied the man carefully. This was him, the waiter Alina and the others had mentioned, the one who had been so attentive, so charming right before overcharging them. Looking at him now with his perfect smile and warm demeanor, Marcus could understand how easy it would be to trust him. "Thank you," Marcus replied, keeping his expression neutral. "I'm looking forward to learning the ropes here." "Vincent has been with us for about 8 months, Diane explained. "He's quickly become one of our most requested servers. The customers adore him." "Some more than others, I imagine," Marcus said carefully, watching for any reaction. If Vincent caught the implication, he didn't show it. His smile remained fixed, professional. "I believe in providing exceptional service to everyone who walks through our doors. That's what Bellamy stands for, isn't it?" "Indeed it is," Diane agreed proudly. "Now, Marcus, let me show you where you'll be working." As Marcus followed Diane deeper into the kitchen, he felt Vincent's eyes on his back. The job ahead suddenly felt more complicated than he had anticipated. He wasn't just looking for evidence of fraud. He was trying to understand why someone like Vincent, clearly intelligent and charismatic, would risk his position to steal from elderly patrons. What Marcus couldn't know yet was that over the next 3 weeks, he would discover secrets far more complex than simple theft, and that the confrontation in the dining room would be just the beginning of a story that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone at Bellamy's. The first week at Bellamy's passed in a blur of activity as Marcus acclimated to his new role. He had been assigned to work under Antonio, preparing appetizers and sides, a position that allowed him to observe the dining room through the service window while keeping a low profile. From this vantage point, he watched Vincent work, studying his interactions with different customers. There was no denying that Vincent was exceptional at his job. He moved through the dining room with grace and confidence, his memory flawless as he recited the evening's specials, his recommendations tailored to each table's preferences. He was equally attentive to all guests, young couples celebrating anniversaries, business executives discussing deals over expensive bottles of wine, tourists treating themselves to a special night out. But it was his interaction with older patrons that Marcus paid particular attention to. On his 3rd night, he noticed an elderly couple being seated in Vincent's section, the woman using a cane, her husband guiding her gently to their table. "Perfect timing," Marcus murmured to himself, positioning himself where he could observe while slicing mushrooms for the risotto special. Vincent approached their table with a warm smile, immediately pulling out the woman's chair and helping her get settled. "Good evening, I'm Vincent, and I'll be taking care of you tonight," he said, his voice carrying clearly to where Marcus stood. "Is this a special occasion?" "It's our 45th anniversary," the husband replied proudly. "Congratulations, that's truly something to celebrate," Vincent exclaimed, his enthusiasm seeming genuine. "If you don't mind my asking, what's your secret to such a long and happy marriage?" As the couple laughed and began sharing their wisdom, Marcus noticed how Vincent leaned in, listening intently, asking follow-up questions that showed he was truly engaged. It was masterful, creating an immediate connection, making the couple feel special and valued. "He's good," Marcus admitted grudgingly to himself. "Really good." Throughout the evening, Vincent returned to their table frequently, bringing complimentary champagne courtesy of the house. suggesting dishes with stories attached to them, creating an experience rather than just a meal. By the time dessert arrived, with a candle and happy anniversary written in chocolate on the plate, the couple was clearly enchanted by him. Marcus watched carefully as Vincent presented the check, noting how he placed it discreetly on the table with a final warm smile and handshake. Nothing seemed amiss. Later that night, after the restaurant had closed, Marcus found an opportunity to check the receipts when the manager stepped away from the office. He quickly located the anniversary couple's bill and compared it to the menu prices. Everything matched perfectly. No overcharges, no added items, just the correct prices plus a generous tip the couple had chosen to leave. Marcus frowned, confusion setting in. If Vincent was selectively targeting victims, how was he choosing them? What was the pattern? His answer came 2 nights later when Mrs. Peterson, one of Alina's friends from church, arrived with her daughter and grandson. Marcus had asked Alina to spread the word among her friends that Bellamy's had a new chef who had previously worked at Johnson's family kitchen, a subtle way to bring in potential targets without raising suspicion. Mrs. Peterson was in her late 70s, elegant in a blue dress that had likely been her Sunday best for the past decade. Her daughter helped her to her seat while her teenage grandson looked around the restaurant with barely concealed awe. "This is fancy, Grandma," the boy whispered a little too loudly. "Now, Darnell, remember what we talked about," Mrs. Peterson replied. "This is a special treat. Your mother got that promotion and we're celebrating properly." Marcus smiled to himself, remembering similar conversations with his own grandmother years ago. He continued preparing plates while keeping an eye on their table, which was, as he had hoped, in Vincent's section. Vincent approached their table with the same professional charm he showed to all his customers, but Marcus noticed something subtle, a slight shift in Vincent's demeanor, an extra layer of attentiveness as he interacted with Mrs. Peterson. "Is this your grandson?" Vincent asked, smiling at Darnell. "He must make you very proud." "Oh, he does," Mrs. Peterson beamed. "He's heading to college next year, first in our family." "That's wonderful," Vincent replied, seeming genuinely impressed. "My grandmother raised me, you know. She worked 2 jobs to put me through school. Women like you are the backbone of our communities." Marcus raised an eyebrow at this personal disclosure. It was the first time he'd heard Vincent mention anything about his background, and it immediately created a bond with Mrs. Peterson, whose face lit up with recognition of a shared experience. Throughout the evening, Vincent was the perfect server, attentive but not hovering, making recommendations but not pushing the most expensive items, bringing a special dessert for Darnell on the house to celebrate his future college plans. When the bill came, Mrs. Peterson's daughter reached for it, but Vincent smoothly handed it directly to Mrs. Peterson instead. "It would be my honor if you would review this, ma'am," he said respectfully. "And may I just say what a pleasure it's been serving you and your beautiful family tonight." Marcus narrowed his eyes, watching as Mrs. Peterson fumbled slightly with her reading glasses before looking at the bill. She smiled up at Vincent and handed her credit card over without scrutiny. The moment Marcus had been waiting for had arrived. He needed to see that receipt. After the restaurant closed, Marcus volunteered to help with final cleanup, ensuring he would be among the last to leave. When the opportunity presented itself, he slipped into the office where the day's receipts were kept. Finding Mrs. Peterson's bill, he carefully compared it to the menu prices they should have been charged. His jaw tightened as he did the math. The discrepancy was subtle, not on the main dishes, which would be too obvious, but on the drinks, sides, and a special dessert that had supposedly been complimentary but appeared on the bill at $18. In total, the overcharge amounted to $43. "Got you," Marcus whispered, quickly taking photos of the receipt with his phone before returning it to the pile. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus documented similar incidents, all following the same pattern. Vincent targeted older black patrons, especially women, establishing trust through personal connection and stories about his grandmother, then presenting bills with subtle overcharges that would likely go unnoticed or unquestioned. The overcharges were never extreme enough to raise immediate alarm, $30 here, $45 there, but over time and across multiple customers, they added up to significant amounts. Marcus calculated that Vincent could easily be stealing an extra $500, $700 per week using this method. What troubled Marcus most was the calculated nature of the deception. Vincent wasn't randomly overcharging. He was specifically targeting a vulnerable demographic, elderly black customers who had lived through segregation and the civil rights movement, who might feel uncomfortable questioning authority in an upscale establishment. who might not want to create a scene by scrutinizing a bill too carefully. It was the targeted nature of the fraud that made Marcus increasingly angry. These were people like his mother, his aunts, his community elders who had fought so hard for respect and dignity. To see them being exploited by someone who pretended to honor them made his blood boil. By the beginning of his third week at Bellamy's, Marcus had compiled enough evidence to take to Detective Harris, who confirmed they could now build a case against Vincent. The plan was for Marcus to continue working through the week while the police prepared to make an arrest, ideally catching Vincent in the act. What Marcus hadn't anticipated was how the situation would escalate, or the unexpected complications that would arise as he learned more about Vincent's background. The revelation came from an unexpected source, Louisa, one of the dishwashers who had been at Bellamy's for over a decade. She had taken a liking to Marcus, appreciating how he, unlike some of the other chefs, always thanked the kitchen staff and treated them with respect. "You watch Vincent very closely," she observed one evening as they were closing up. "You don't trust him, do you?" Marcus hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Let's just say I have my reasons." Louisa nodded knowingly. "He has a way with the customers, especially the older ones. Reminds me of my son, so charming when he wants something." "Is your son also in the restaurant business?" Marcus asked, sensing an opening. "No," Louisa sighed, her expression darkening. "My Eduardo is in prison, 5 years now. Fraud, they called it, though he says he was just trying to help his grandmother with her medical bills." Marcus continued wiping down his station, keeping his tone casual. "That's tough. Family takes care of family, though. I understand that." "Vincent understands, too," Louisa said quietly. "His grandmother raised him after his parents died. Cancer took her 3 years ago. He still visits her grave every Sunday morning before his shift." Marcus paused, absorbing this information. "He was close to her. She was everything to him," Louisa confirmed. "Worked as a housekeeper for rich families in Chestnut Hill for 40 years. Vincent told me she never complained, even when they treated her poorly, just kept working, saving every penny for his education." The conversation left Marcus unsettled. It didn't excuse Vincent's actions, but it added a layer of complexity to the situation. Was Vincent targeting elderly black patrons because they reminded him of his grandmother? Was there some twisted logic of retribution in his actions? These questions were still swirling in Marcus's mind 2 days later when Alina Coleman herself came to dine at Bellamy's, accompanied by her daughter Patricia. Marcus had specifically asked Alina not to come, concerned that Vincent might recognize her name from previous complaints, but Alina had insisted. "I want to see this through," she had told Marcus firmly. "I've been standing up against injustice since before you were born, Marcus Johnson. I'm not stopping now." From his position in the kitchen, Marcus watched anxiously as Alina and Patricia were seated, directly in Vincent's section, as he had feared. He considered asking Antonio for a break so he could warn them, but before he could act, Vincent was already approaching their table. Marcus held his breath as Vincent introduced himself, wondering if he would recognize Alina's name when she gave it. If he did, Vincent showed no sign, treating them with the same polished charm he showed all his customers. As the evening progressed, Marcus observed the familiar pattern unfolding. Vincent was especially attentive to Alina, drawing her out with questions about her family and sharing stories about his own grandmother. By the time dessert arrived, Alina was smiling and chatting with Vincent as if they were old friends. When the check came, Vincent placed it directly in front of Alina with a respectful nod. "It's been an absolute pleasure serving you this evening, Mrs. Coleman. I hope you'll come back and see us again soon." Marcus watched as Alina put on her reading glasses and, unlike the other victims, scrutinized the bill carefully. He saw the moment her expression changed, the slight stiffening of her shoulders as she leaned over to whisper something to her daughter. Patricia's reaction was less restrained. "Excuse me," she called out as Vincent passed nearby. "There seems to be a mistake on our bill." Vincent returned to the table immediately, his expression concerned. "I'm so sorry to hear that." "What seems to be the problem?" "We were charged for a bottle of wine we didn't order," Patricia said firmly, pointing to the bill. "And this dessert was supposed to be complimentary." For a brief moment, Marcus saw something flicker across Vincent's face, surprise, perhaps, at being challenged, or calculation as he decided how to respond. Then his professional mask slipped back into place. "My sincere apologies, Mrs. Coleman," Vincent said smoothly. "That's certainly an error on my part. Let me correct that right away." Marcus watched as Vincent took the bill and walked toward the computer terminal. Instead of making the correction, however, Vincent glanced around to ensure no one was watching, then reached into his pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a different check, one he had prepared in advance. This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. He quickly signaled to Diane, who was across the dining room, then stepped out of the kitchen just as Vincent was returning to Alina's table with the substitute bill. "Vincent," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the restaurant. "I believe there's a problem with Mrs. Coleman's check." Vincent froze, turning slowly to face Marcus. "Everything's under control. There was a simple misunderstanding that I'm correcting now." "Is that why you're bringing a different bill entirely?" Marcus asked, closing the distance between them. "One you had ready in your pocket." The dining room had grown quiet, other patrons turning to observe the confrontation. Vincent's eyes darted around, noting the attention they were drawing. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice low and warning. "You're just a line cook. This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," Marcus replied, reaching into his jacket to pull out a folder. "Because Mrs. Coleman is a friend of mine, and she's not the first person you've overcharged at this restaurant." Vincent's face paled as he looked from Marcus to the folder, realization dawning. "You've been watching me." "For 3 weeks," Marcus confirmed, "documenting every overcharge, every elderly black patron you've targeted." "Targeted?" Vincent repeated, his voice rising with indignation. "You don't know what you're talking about." By now, Diane had approached, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "What's going on here?" Marcus handed her the folder. "Evidence that Vincent has been systematically overcharging elderly black customers for months. The police have copies as well." As Diane began reviewing the documents, her face growing increasingly troubled, Vincent made a desperate move. He grabbed a tray of drinks from a passing server and flung it at Marcus, creating the chaotic scene that had opened our story, Marcus standing in shock as wine and soup splattered across his whites, Vincent shouting accusations, plates crashing to the floor. "You're nothing but a fraud," Vincent had shouted, his face contorted with rage. "You had no right to be in my section, no right to go through my receipts." And now, as we return to where we started, Vincent's grip on Marcus's lapels loosened as the color drained from his face. He looked from Diane to Mrs. Coleman, then back to Marcus, his expression shifting from rage to something else, something desperate and haunted. "You don't understand," Vincent whispered, his voice breaking. "None of you understand why I had to do this." "Then explain it to us," Diane said, her voice stern but not unkind. "Because right now all I see is theft and betrayal of trust." Vincent released Marcus and stepped back, suddenly looking much younger and more vulnerable than his confident persona had ever allowed. For a moment he seemed to consider making a run for it, his eyes darting toward the exit. Then his shoulders slumped in defeat. "My grandmother," he began, his voice so low they had to strain to hear him. "She worked for 40 years cleaning houses in Chestnut Hill. 40 years of yes, ma'am, and no, sir, to people who treated her like she was invisible, who paid her less than they promised because they knew she couldn't complain, who forgot her Christmas bonus when times got tight but still took their European vacations." He looked directly at Alina now, his eyes pleading for understanding. "She was just like you, Mrs. Coleman, dignified, proud, never letting on how much it hurt to be disrespected, to be cheated. She'd come home with less money than she was owed and tell me it was fine, that the important thing was I would have opportunities she never had." "That doesn't justify what you did," Marcus said quietly. "Doesn't it?" Vincent challenged, a flash of anger returning. "Do you know what happened when she got sick? Pancreatic cancer, stage 4 by the time they diagnosed it. She needed specialized treatment our insurance wouldn't fully cover. I called every family she'd ever worked for asking for help. These people whose children she had practically raised, whose secrets she had kept, whose homes she had maintained for decades." Vincent's voice broke. "Know how many offered to help? One, just one family out of dozens. The rest couldn't be bothered. She died in pain because we couldn't afford the treatments that might have given her a few more months of comfort, at least." The restaurant remained silent as Vincent's story hung in the air. Marcus felt a complicated mix of emotions, anger at Vincent's crimes, but also a grudging understanding of the pain that had driven them. "So this was what, revenge?" Diane asked finally. Vincent shook his head. "Not at first. When I started here, I was just trying to build a new life. But then I'd see these elderly customers come in, some of them so much like the people my grandmother worked for, and something in me just snapped." He turned to Alina, his expression genuinely remorseful now. "I didn't start out planning to steal, but the first time was an accident. I added a charge by mistake, and when the customer didn't notice, I just kept the money. And then it became easier. and I started telling myself a story that I was just collecting the debt society owed my grandmother. But I know that's not true. I know what I did was wrong. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of police officers entering the restaurant. Detective Harris approached, nodding briefly to Marcus before turning his attention to Vincent. "Vincent Pearson, I'm Detective Harris. We need to talk about some discrepancies in customer billing here at Bellamy's." As the officers led Vincent away, Alina Coleman stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "Young man," she called, causing Vincent to pause and look back. "What you did was wrong, no question about that. But I understand pain and how it can make us do things we regret." Vincent stared at her, clearly surprised by her words. "When you've paid your debt," Alina continued, "come see me. The community center where I volunteer helps people rebuild their lives. Maybe there's a way you can make amends that actually honors your grandmother's memory instead of tarnishing it." Vincent nodded slowly, a mix of shame and gratitude on his face before the officers escorted him out. In the aftermath, the restaurant gradually returned to normal, servers apologizing to customers, Diane offering complimentary desserts to make up for the disturbance. Marcus found himself sitting at a table with Alina, Patricia, and Diane, all of them processing what had just happened. "I should have noticed," Diane said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I pride myself on running a tight ship, on treating my customers with respect. To think this was happening under my roof." "Don't be too hard on yourself," Alina replied. "People like Vincent become very good at hiding their actions. The important thing is what you do now." Diane straightened her shoulders, determination replacing shock. "First, I'll be personally contacting every customer we can identify who might have been overcharged. Full refunds, of course, and a sincere apology. Beyond that," she turned to Marcus, "I think Bellamy's could use someone with your integrity and experience in a more permanent capacity. Not as a line cook, but as our new head chef." Marcus blinked in surprise. "What about Antonio?" "Antonio has been wanting to move back to Italy for years," Diane explained. "I've been holding him here out of selfishness, really. This might be the push we both need to make changes." Marcus considered the offer, memories of his own restaurant, the warmth, the community, the sense of purpose it had given him flowing through his mind. "I appreciate the offer," he said slowly, "but I'm not sure that's the right path for me. What happened here tonight has made me realize how much I miss having my own place, a restaurant that's truly part of the community." Alina reached across the table to pat his hand. "You know, the old Allen building on Walnut Street is available. The neighborhood association has been looking for the right business to anchor that block's revitalization." "That's in my old neighborhood," Marcus said, interest kindling in his eyes. "The rent control measures we fought for last year were approved," Patricia added. "It would be protected from the kind of increases that forced you to close Johnson's." As they continued talking, the outline of a new possibility began to take shape, not just a return to what Marcus had lost, but something new that built upon his experience and the connections he had made through this unlikely undercover assignment. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the center of a crowded dining room, surveying the scene with quiet satisfaction. Johnson and Coleman's had been open for just a month, but already it had become a neighborhood fixture, a place where fine dining techniques met soul food traditions, where customers of all ages and backgrounds felt welcome. Alina sat at her usual table near the window, holding court with a group of her friends, some of whom had been victims of Vincent's scheme at Bellamy's. Diane Bellamy was there too, now a regular customer and informal advisor to Marcus on the fine dining aspects of his new venture. In the kitchen, Marcus had assembled a team that reflected his vision, experienced chefs working alongside young people from the neighborhood who were learning the trade through the restaurant's apprenticeship program. The menu celebrated Black culinary traditions while incorporating techniques Marcus had honed throughout his career, including his brief time at Bellamy's. As he made his rounds through the dining room, greeting customers and checking that everything was to their satisfaction, Marcus paused at the sight of a familiar face entering the restaurant. Vincent Pearson stood in the doorway, looking uncertain and much changed from the confident waiter he had been 6 months earlier. After serving a short sentence and paying restitution, Vincent had taken Alina up on her offer to visit the community center. Through her guidance, he had begun working with a program that helped elderly residents navigate financial matters, using his knowledge of how people could be exploited to now protect them instead. Marcus approached him, offering a handshake that was both a greeting and a peace offering. "Alina said you might stop by." Vincent accepted the handshake, his expression solemn. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Marcus replied, gesturing toward a quiet table in the corner. "Alina taught me that. She's been a good influence on both of us, I think." As they sat down, Marcus noted the changes in Vincent, the humility that had replaced arrogance, the genuine remorse that had transformed his understanding of his actions. "I've been thinking a lot about my grandmother," Vincent said after they had ordered coffee. "About what she really would have wanted for me. She didn't raise me to become someone who hurts others. She raised me to be better than the people who hurt her." Marcus nodded, understanding the complex legacy that family could leave. "My mother used to say that the true measure of healing isn't forgetting the harm that was done to you, but making sure you don't pass that harm along to others." "I'm trying to live by that now," Vincent said quietly. "It's why I wanted to come here today to thank you, actually. If you hadn't stopped me, I don't know how far I would have gone, how much damage I would have done." Their conversation was interrupted by Alina, who spotted Vincent and came over to join them, settling into a chair with the dignified grace that had made her a natural leader in the community for decades. "Well now," she said, looking between the two men with satisfaction. "This is what progress looks like. Two men who started as adversaries sitting together as—" She raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Works in progress," Marcus suggested with a small smile. "Aren't we all?" Alina replied wisely. "Vincent, tell Marcus about the senior financial literacy program you've been helping with. I think there might be a way to host some sessions here at the restaurant." As Vincent began describing the program, Marcus looked around at the restaurant he had created from the ashes of his previous failure and the unexpected detour of his undercover work at Bellamy's. What had begun as an investigation into fraud had transformed into something much more meaningful, a second chance not just for him, but for Vincent, for the neighborhood, and for the intergenerational connections that formed the backbone of their community. The restaurant hummed with conversation and laughter, with stories being shared across tables and generations. It wasn't just a place to eat. It was a place to connect, to remember, and to move forward together. In exposing the truth at Bellamy's, Marcus had discovered a deeper truth about himself and his purpose. That sometimes the most important ingredient in any recipe for change was the courage to start again. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. As the months passed, Johnson & Coleman's became more than just a successful restaurant. It became a community hub where the wisdom of elders met the energy of youth, where culinary traditions were preserved and reimagined, and where the complex history of the neighborhood was acknowledged and honored. Marcus expanded the apprenticeship program, partnering with the local high school to offer culinary training to students interested in careers in food service. Many of these young people came from backgrounds similar to Vincent's, raised by grandparents or other family members, carrying the weight of expectations and dreams that weren't their own. Vincent became a regular presence at the restaurant, not as staff, but as a volunteer coordinator for the senior programs that now used the space during off hours. His financial literacy workshops for elderly residents had expanded to include sessions on avoiding scams and fraud, lessons he could teach with particular insight. One evening, as the restaurant was closing, Marcus found Vincent sitting alone at the bar, staring thoughtfully at a photograph he had placed on the counter. "Your grandmother?" Marcus asked, recognizing the dignified elderly woman in the faded image. Vincent nodded. "Estelle Pearson. Today would have been her 85th birthday." Marcus studied the photograph, a black woman in her 60s standing proudly in front of a modest house, her expression serious but with kindness in her eyes. "She would have loved this place," Vincent said quietly. "The food, of course, she was an amazing cook herself, but more than that, she would have loved what you've created here, a place where everyone is treated with respect, regardless of age or background." Marcus poured 2 small glasses of bourbon and slid one toward Vincent. "To Estelle," he said, raising his glass, "and to second chances." They drank in companionable silence, the weight of their shared history settling into something like understanding, if not quite friendship. "You know," Marcus said eventually, "we're hosting a special dinner next month, celebrating the elders of the community. People like Alina who fought for civil rights, who kept neighborhoods together during tough times, who passed down recipes and wisdom through generations. I'd like you to help organize it." Vincent looked surprised. "You trust me with that?" "Alina trusts you," Marcus replied. "That's good enough for me. Besides, who better to honor our elders than someone who understands both how they can be exploited and how much they have to offer?" The Elder Appreciation Dinner became an annual tradition at Johnson & Coleman's, growing each year as word spread throughout Philadelphia. By the 3rd year, they had to expand into the street, setting up tables along the block in a celebration that combined food, music, storytelling, and history. Diane Bellamy remained a steadfast supporter, using her connections in the restaurant industry to secure donations and publicity for the event. Her own restaurant had weathered the scandal of Vincent's fraud and emerged stronger, with new policies in place to protect vulnerable customers and a renewed commitment to community engagement. Eleanor, now in her mid-80s, watched with satisfaction as the seeds she had planted in Marcus, in Vincent, in the community, blossomed into something beautiful and sustaining. Her health was beginning to fail, her movements slower, but her mind remained sharp and her influence undimmed. "You know what I'm most proud of?" she said to Marcus during the fourth annual dinner, as they watched Vincent directing a team of teenagers who were serving appetizers to tables of honored elders. "It's not just that we created something good from something bad, it's that we didn't let bitterness have the final word." Marcus followed her gaze to Vincent, who was now kneeling beside an elderly man in a wheelchair, listening intently to a story the man was telling, his expression one of genuine interest and respect. "He's come a long way," Marcus acknowledged. "We all have," Eleanor replied. "That's the secret to a life well lived, Marcus. Not avoiding mistakes or harm, that's impossible. But learning from them, growing beyond them, using even the painful parts to create something meaningful." Eleanor's wisdom stayed with Marcus long after she passed away the following winter. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, family, friends, community members, politicians, and civil rights leaders who had worked alongside her over the decades. Vincent and Marcus sat together, united in their grief and in their commitment to carrying forward her legacy. In the years that followed, Johnson and Coleman's, which Marcus officially renamed Eleanor's on the 5th anniversary of her passing, continued to thrive as both a business and a community institution. The apprenticeship program expanded to include business classes, teaching young people not just how to cook, but how to run their own establishments. Several former apprentices went on to open restaurants of their own in neighboring communities, creating a network of Black-owned businesses that supported each other and their neighborhoods. Vincent eventually moved into a management role at the community center, overseeing programs for both seniors and youth. He never returned to restaurant work, but he remained connected to the culinary world through his collaboration with Marcus on various community initiatives. One crisp autumn day, nearly 10 years after the confrontation at Bellamy's, Marcus stood at the window of Eleanor's, watching as the neighborhood prepared for the annual Elder Appreciation Dinner, now a citywide event that drew visitors from across Philadelphia and beyond. Vincent joined him, both men now in their 60s, their former antagonism long since transformed into a complex friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Vincent asked. "If you hadn't gone undercover at Bellamy's, if I hadn't been caught?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think about it often," he admitted, not with regret but with a kind of wonder at how lives intersect, how conflict can sometimes lead to creation if we're willing to learn from it. Vincent nodded, understanding. "My grandmother used to say that God works in mysterious ways." I didn't fully appreciate what she meant until all of this. He gestured to the restaurant, to the community that had formed around it, to the legacy they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. Outside, an elderly woman was being helped from a car by her granddaughter, both dressed in their finest for the celebration. The woman moved slowly with a walker, but her head was held high with dignity and purpose. "There's Mrs. Thompson," Vincent said, recognition in his voice. "She was one of the first participants in our financial literacy program. Now she teaches it to others. And her granddaughter just applied for our apprenticeship program," Marcus added. The cycle continues. As they watched more elders arriving, greeted with respect and celebration by the younger generation, both men reflected silently on the journey that had brought them here, a journey that had begun with deception and confrontation but had transformed into something neither could have imagined. In that moment, Marcus understood with perfect clarity what Eleanor had been trying to teach them all along. That true justice wasn't just about catching wrongdoers or righting wrongs, but about creating communities where everyone was valued, where the wisdom of age was honored, where second chances were possible, and where even the darkest experiences could be transformed into light. The restaurant that had begun as a response to fraud had become something much more, a living testament to the power of reconciliation, to the possibility of growth and change, and to the enduring strength of a community that refused to be defined by its wounds, but instead chose to be known for its healing. As the first notes of music began to play and the celebration commenced, Marcus and Vincent stepped outside to welcome their guests. Two unlikely allies united by their respect for the past, their commitment to the present, and their hope for the future they were helping to create, one meal, one story, one act of understanding at a time. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.